Greetings, this is Flint Callahan. Let's get right into the narrative for this evening. My mother found it amusing to abandon me, marooned in a different state. A test for the incompetent one, she called it. My entire family erupted in laughter. I remained silent and departed. A decade and a half later, my doorbell rang incessantly. My mother was weeping outside, and my phone displayed her number repeatedly, as if attempting to bore a hole through my clothing. She had called 36 times. I am Hannah, currently 30 years old. Those I encounter today often perceive me as inherently resilient. They observe my composed demeanor, my unwavering grip, the secured entrances, and the independent existence I've cultivated. They fail to recognize the 15-year-old I once was, the girl who experienced profound abandonment beneath the harsh glow of gas station lights, in a locale where every road sign felt like a harbinger. At that time, my relatives and I embarked on a journey by car, effortlessly traversing state borders. Amidst moments of mirth and inexpensive refreshments, my mother concluded that my aspirations rendered me fragile. My artistic pursuits, my gentle nature, my resistance to conforming to her desires. Consequently, during a brief stop where I was indoors for under 5 minutes, she transformed my existence into a cruel jest. Upon my return, the parking area appeared unchanged, yet my family had vanished. No gleam of headlights, no engine hum, no outline of our vehicle departing around the bend. Only desolation, the breeze, and the sudden sharpness of my own breathing. I called out once, then again. It then dawned on me that no one would be returning. Not swiftly, not compassionately, not unless they deliberately chose to. And that specific decision altered everything. Before I reveal her words and the subsequent events after my departure, please share your current time and location from which you are observing. I am intrigued by the potential reach of this narrative. I wish I could claim I reacted with cinematic panic and miraculously resolved the situation, but the actual experience was far grimmer and more protracted. I remained stationary, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped my cell phone. Then, glancing downwards, I discovered my phone was not even in my pocket. I re-examined, as if disbelief might reshape circumstances. It was empty. My wallet was within my backpack, but the bag felt unusually light. I unzipped it, and my gut churned. My money had disappeared, and the small emergency contact card I habitually folded behind my art pad had been torn out. This was not coincidental. It was meticulously orchestrated. The recollection assailed me in fragments. My mother's earlier fleeting glance at my bag. Her smile when my attention was elsewhere. My brother's excessively boisterous laughter, as if striving to suppress culpability with sound. Her words resurfaced with piercing clarity, as though etched into my very being. A test for the incompetent one. She had uttered this during breakfast when I inquired about visiting a small art supply store I'd discovered online. She declared I would never thrive in the practical world due to my reliance on comfort, labeling me as weak. Afterward, she surveyed the other family members as if poised for a show. And they applauded. Therefore, when I entered the restroom at that service area, still smarting from the indignity, I remained unaware I was entering a prearranged snare. I rushed to the perimeter of the parking area, scrutinizing the road as though my gaze might materialize our vehicle. The thoroughfare continued its flow, entirely undisturbed. I began inquiring of unfamiliar individuals if they had observed a dark SUV containing a family, but my voice faltered, and I perceived suspicion emerging on their countenances. A man wearing a baseball cap dismissed me, advising me to locate your parents, as if I were a young child who had strayed, not a teenager intentionally discarded like refuse. A woman holding a travel mug asked my state of residence. When I responded, her brows furrowed, suggesting disbelief. This was the most agonizing aspect. Being marooned was not merely frightening, it was deeply demeaning. It felt as though the world had silently concurred that I merited no assistance until I demonstrated my deservingness. Darkness did not descend abruptly. It gradually enveloped me as I pursued various possibilities. I entered the convenience store, requesting permission from the clerk to use their telephone. He gestured toward a dusty public phone outside, remarking, assuming it's operational. I lacked any currency. I inquired if I might borrow a single quarter. He observed me intently for an extended moment, then pushed a coin across the counter, akin to offering food to a lost animal. I then dialed the sole telephone number I knew by heart, my closest companion's. The call rang indefinitely before disconnecting. I attempted again. No success. Next, I tried the number familiar to every child, the one to call in an emergency. I dialed 911, but the payphone consumed my quarter and the connection severed after a single utterance. I'm stranded, my family left. A sharp click. My throat constricted. I understood I didn't even know my current location. The service area sign bore a name, yet it was as incomprehensible as an unfamiliar tongue. I returned inside, asking the clerk about the closest metropolis, the highway's destination, and the proximity of a police department. He eventually displayed a slight concession, revealing the reality. The closest station was many miles distant, and he was unable to abandon his position. He provided water, not due to complete conviction in my narrative, but because I appeared on the verge of emotional collapse. I settled on the curb outdoors, drawing my knees close, observing vehicles arrive and depart. Their headlamps cast elongated white trails on the pavement, and with each passing dark SUV, my heart jolted as if attempting to flee my ribcage. It was never them. When the clerk emerged for a cigarette, he questioned, "Are you certain you didn't simply run away?" I fixed my gaze upon him. I longed to shriek. Instead, I stated they intended to impart a lesson. He scoffed dismissively, then ceased upon seeing my expression. It was then he finally grasped that this was not adolescent theatrics, but malevolence disguised as jest. He informed me about the presence of security surveillance. He mentioned that a highway patrol officer might call by later. Furthermore, he imparted a piece of wisdom I didn't then realize would be lifelong significant. To receive assistance, you must maintain sufficient composure to recount the facts as a statement, not an entreaty. Consequently, I compelled myself to regulate my breathing. I compelled myself to recall specifics: our car's model, the license plate's origin state, the decal on the rear window, the precise moment of my entry. I remained there, with a pen borrowed from the service desk, meticulously recording every detail on a receipt. For if my mother sought to transform me into an object of ridicule, I would transform her mockery into tangible proof. The initial officer appeared near midnight, his headlights traversing the parking area like an illuminating beam. He was tall, appeared weary, the sort of man whose countenance had learned to mask astonishment. The clerk gestured him closer, indicating me as if relinquishing an unsolvable dilemma. When the officer inquired about the incident, I refrained from weeping. I desperately wished to, I yearned to collapse in a manner that would provoke adults to offer solace. However, I recalled the clerk's advice. I articulated my account as if reciting from a prepared text, despite my trembling voice. I informed him of my age, 15. I explained that my family had departed without me. I emphasized that it was not an oversight, as my phone and emergency contacts had been confiscated and my money was missing. The officer's demeanor shifted at this detail. He asked about any physical marks. He inquired if I had been harmed. He questioned whether my parents had a history of disciplinary actions. I struggled with the final query, uncertain what constituted discipline when the primary tool was degradation. He escorted me indoors, requested the clerk retrieve camera recordings, then moved behind the counter to make a telephone call. I caught fragments: potential abandonment, minor, out-of-state license plate, verifying last known travel route. These were weighty adult terms, words signifying that my mother's actions were no mere jest, they constituted a criminal offense. As we waited, I opened my art book and engaged in the sole activity I could perform without sanction: drawing. Not picturesque scenery, nor intricate facial representations. I depicted a nocturnal gas station, a small girl seated on a curb, and a vehicle vanishing into a dark highway, resembling a mouth consuming radiance. Below, I inscribed the quotation in bold, furious lettering, a test for the incompetent one, because I was determined not to lose the precise wording. I wish to preserve it as one recalls a lasting mark. The officer returned, inquiring if I possessed any relatives not traveling with my immediate family. I provided my aunt's name, my mother's sister. She was the sole adult who had ever validated my artistic endeavors. I didn't know her telephone number by rote, but I knew her municipality. The officer processed this information through a system with effortless ease, as if the world possessed a mechanism for locating individuals who were adrift. He connected with her via phone, and upon hearing her voice, a barrier within me finally fractured. She did not question my culpability. She did not inquire if I had exaggerated the situation. "Hannah, I'm coming." She arrived 2 hours later, her hair disheveled and her eyes alight with fury. She embraced me with such force my ribs ached, then pulled back, scrutinizing my face as if committing it to memory. Subsequently, she addressed the officer, stating, "What do we do next?" That utterance, "What do we do next?" was my initial comprehension that survival extends beyond mere existence. It involves formulating a strategy. The officer informed us that a bulletin for the vehicle would be issued, but since my family had not reported me absent, the system was not triggered as commonly believed. My aunt's jaw tightened so severely I feared it might fracture. "So, they can simply abandon her and depart." The officer responded, "Not if we document it." He then posed the query that caused my stomach to churn. "Are you prepared to provide an official declaration?" I gazed at my drawing. Here is the question that struck me with the force of a plummet. If those designated to safeguard you can forsake you for amusement, what identity do you forge once you endure their actions? I did not yet possess the answer, but I was certain I would not shield my mother from repercussions. I assented with a nod. "Yes," I stated, "I want it recorded." And in that instant, my mother's lesson ceased to be her narrative and became my own. We journeyed to the closest precinct before daybreak, my aunt clutching the steering wheel as if restraining an impending tempest. I provided a formal declaration to a detective who conversed gently but transcribed swiftly, as if he understood that composed tones elicit greater veracity. He requested every minute detail, and I furnished them. The precise time, the geographical position, the vehicle's description, the confiscated possessions, the verbatim quotation. When I mentioned my phone had been removed, he inquired if I had evidence of its ownership. I displayed the imprint in my backpack's pocket where it habitually rested, and the charging cable I still possessed, having packed it separately. While not conclusive proof, it offered context. Then the detective posed the query that felt like ingesting shards of glass. "Do you believe they had an intention to return?" I desired to affirm this, as the conviction of their planned return would mitigate the sense of perfidy. Yet the reality was, had they purposed a swift comeback, they would not have divested me of the means to seek aid. They would not have purloined my emergency card. They would not have laughed with such callousness. "I don't know," I replied, and the detective nodded as if accustomed to that response. My aunt repeatedly dialed my mother's telephone. No response. We contacted my brother. No answer. Then, in the late morning, a number finally called back. My aunt activated the speakerphone function. My mother's voice resonated, cheerful and irritated, as though we had disrupted her enjoyment. "What is it now?" My aunt did not shout, which astonished me. She spoke with the authority of a magistrate. "Where is Hannah?" A moment of silence passed, followed by laughter. Light, unconcerned, almost triumphant. "Oh my God, you're overreacting. She's all right. She's gaining experience. That's the whole idea." My aunt's expression became impassive. "She's at a police station in a different state." Another longer silence. Then my mother asserted, "Well, she must have managed to get there. Then you see, it succeeded." A chill settled deep within me. That particular sentence was the definitive disclosure. She wasn't apprehensive about my disappearance. She was gratified. My suffering and survival confirmed her harshness as a valid method of upbringing. The detective instructed my aunt to terminate the call and note the number. He inquired if my mother would communicate with him. My aunt redialed, handed him the phone, and my mother's demeanor instantly shifted, sweet, bewildered, guiltless. "Officer, it was merely a jest. We were close by. We fully intended to return. He questioned the absence of my phone," she claimed. I have no idea what she's referring to. He asked why I lacked emergency contact information. She responded, "She frequently misplaces her belongings." I sat there, absorbing this, and came to a critical understanding. My mother had not only forsaken me, she was prepared to fabricate outright to nullify the event. The detective informed her that leaving a minor unaccompanied in such a manner constituted a grave offense. My mother's tone grew sharper. "Are you truly going to penalize a parent for attempting to fortify her child?" The detective countered. "Ma'am, imparting resilience is not synonymous with creating a hazardous situation." Once he concluded the call, my aunt faced me and stated, "You are not obligated to return." The word seemed inconceivable. Returning had always been a given, like a fundamental law. Yet, within that station, surrounded by official documents, under the harsh glow of fluorescent bulbs, and in the presence of a woman genuinely concerned for my well-being, I comprehended that home was not a physical location. Home signified security, and my mother had demonstrated her inability to provide it. My aunt submitted a petition for temporary guardianship that very afternoon. This action was not yet driven by a desire for vengeance, not the kind people typically envision, but by my urgent need for safeguarding from a family that perceived my terror as amusement. It was then that the repercussions subtly began to materialize, much like an elongating shadow. The official police documentation, the recorded telephone conversation, the security camera evidence, the detective's memoranda. My mother had devised her test. Now, the world would evaluate its outcome. Individuals often inquire about recovery after such an ordeal, anticipating an uplifting address. The candid response is that reconstruction initially proves unstimulating. It entails bureaucratic procedures. It involves therapy sessions one might prefer to avoid. It necessitates learning not to recoil when someone elevates their tone. It means sleeping in a space where no one can intrude and deride you for requiring repose. I relocated to live with my aunt, changed educational institutions, and endured months feeling overly sensitive to the world. Nevertheless, I retained my art pad. I continued sketching that service station. I persisted in illustrating the deserted parking area and the road that absorbed my family's receding taillights. I did not draw it out of a desire for anguish, but because I sought to master the recollection before it consumed me. The legal proceedings advanced more deliberately than my emotional state. Interstate telephone conversations occurred. Meetings took place where adults employed terms such as neglect, custody, and child's welfare. My mother endeavored to manage the account, as was her custom. She informed family members I was insubordinate. She told neighbors I was melodramatic. She conveyed to anyone who would heed that I had involved law enforcement over a mere practical joke. Yet, the empirical proof was impervious to her charisma. The video captured me entering the establishment and exiting unaccompanied. The public phone records indicated the moment I attempted to seek aid. The recorded conversation captured her laughter. Repercussions are not invariably accompanied by arrests. Occasionally, they manifest as doors silently shutting. Her invitations ceased. Individuals no longer found her humor credible. Certain relatives distanced themselves, and within our familial structure, a fissure formed that never completely mended. Concurrently, I engaged in activities she most detested. I developed into my authentic self without her approval. I sought admission to art programs. I held employment after academic hours. I acquired the ability to request assistance without feeling the need to apologize for my presence. During my university years, I enrolled in a course on narrative and psychological injury, and the instructor made a statement that caused my throat to constrict. The individual who recounts the story dictates its interpretation. It was then I grasped that my mother's true apprehension was not my potential failure, but rather my eventual voice. Therefore, I articulated my experiences. Not instantly, not on public platforms, not seeking validation. Initially, I spoke in intimate settings, support circles, university discussions, a community event focused on youth welfare, where I declared openly, "Being deserted is not an instruction, it is a profound injury." Years elapsed, and the narrative accompanied me like a silent confidant. Subsequently, my creative work began to gain recognition. Artworks, interviews, a modest display centered on themes of desertion and resilience. And with each publication, each shared post, each individual asserting, I have experienced something similar. My mother's grip on the deception she had constructed diminished further. This explains why, a decade and a half later, she stood on my veranda, weeping as if the world had at last acknowledged her plight, and inquired, "So, what have you done?" The doorbell continued its persistent, anxious summons. My telephone incessantly vibrated with her unanswered calls, and at that juncture, I no longer perceived myself as a child. I felt akin to a judge wielding a gavel, for I was the one who determined her renewed access to me. I did not immediately open the door. I remained behind it, attending to the doorbell's cadence, like a pulse alien to my dwelling. My phone buzzed repeatedly, her name illuminating the display as an urgent plea I had once desperately sought, but never obtained. Through the peephole, I observed her distinctly. My mother aged, somehow diminished, her mascara smudged, her hands clasped as if she could supplicate her way back into my existence. I ought to have experienced triumph. Instead, I felt a more resolute sensation, as though the aspect of me she had attempted to shatter had finally solidified into tempered metal. I unlatched the door only partially, allowing the security chain to remain engaged. Her eyes widened with relief, and she instinctively extended her hand, as if anticipating an embrace. I stood motionless. "Hannah," she murmured, her voice quivering, "please, I must speak with you." I examined her countenance, awaiting an apology, a genuine one, not a theatrical display. Yet she did not commence with, "I'm sorry." She began with, "I wouldn't be here if the matter wasn't critical." That statement conveyed all I needed to ascertain. Her presence was not prompted by the significance of my suffering. She was here because something, at long last, jeopardized her. "What is your request?" I inquired. My tone was composed, which appeared to disconcert her more profoundly than anger might have. She swallowed audibly and cast a glance behind her, as though neighbors might be observing. "May I enter?" she implored. I tightened my hold on the door. "No." Her mouth agape, as if the concept of such a refusal directed at her was inconceivable. "Hannah." "No," I reiterated, this time with a gentler inflection, desiring her to comprehend. It was not sentiment, it was established protocol. Her eyes welled up once more. "I know you despise me," she hastily stated. "But you don't comprehend the current situation. I am facing difficulties." There it was. Difficulties. Not penitence, not responsibility, merely difficulties. With trembling digits, she extracted a folded document from her purse, attempting to push it through the narrow opening in the door. I did not accept it. "Clarify," I instructed. She exhaled as if releasing a breath held for an eternity. "That narrative," she whispered, "the one circulating. The one concerning a young woman abandoned at a service area. People are asserting it's me." I fixed my gaze upon her. My mouth became parched because I already understood her implication. My art show had been highlighted in a regional publication the previous month. They had questioned the title of the series, "The Rest Stop Lessons." I had not identified her directly. I had not indicated a photograph and proclaimed her identity. I had simply narrated the verifiable events that transpired for me in my personal narrative within my own creative output. And others, complete strangers, had identified the recurring theme, much like a survivor spots a familiar danger. Her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles bleached white. "I was fired," she abruptly confessed. An email was sent to my supervisor. They included snapshots. The allegations claimed I was a threat, that I had deserted my child. Her voice cracked on the final phrase, seemingly seeking compassion despite the truthful depiction. And I inquired. That solitary word struck her with the force of a blow. She rapidly fluttered her eyelids, bewildered. "And I need you to rectify this," she stated as if it were the most logical plea imaginable. "Simply inform them it was fabricated, or that you overstated, or claim it was a misinterpretation. You're capable of doing that. You're articulate, Hannah. You always have been. I was momentarily speechless. Her sheer nerve left my chest feeling empty. A decade and a half prior, she had taken my cell phone, my cash, my crucial contacts, and my feeling of security. Now, she stood on my doorstep, requesting that I compromise my own reality to preserve her good name. "You arrived here," I uttered deliberately, "to request that I deceive." Her expression contorted as though I were being unjust. "I came here to implore you to cease ruining my existence." I let out a single, abrupt, mirthless laugh that surprised even myself. "You were responsible for that," I stated. Not I. Her gaze abruptly blazed with fury, and I immediately identified it. It was the familiar Susan, the one who despised being trapped. "I fortified you," she retorted sharply. "You've achieved success now, haven't you? You ought to express gratitude to me." My gut churned, recognizing the identical reasoning she had employed at the service station. Malice cloaked as encouragement. Harm presented as affection. She moved nearer to the slight opening in the door, her voice dropping to an unnervingly personal and scheming tone. "Hannah, dear, you've always been delicate. I acted out of necessity. My intention was to make you more resilient. You wouldn't have persevered without that experience." The term lesson struck me like a venomous dart. The part of me that was still a 15-year-old recoiled, yet my 30-year-old self remained composed. "Do you recall what you named it?" I inquired. She paused. "What? Can you recall the precise phrasing?" Her eyebrows furrowed. "I cannot." "Oh, you certainly do," I stated, my tone growing sharper for the initial time. "You articulated it distinctly. You pronounced it like a joke's climax. A trial for the worthless individual." Her complexion paled. "I did not." "Indeed, you did," I countered, bringing my phone up between us. My thumb paused over a specific file I maintained for moments when I needed reassurance of my sanity. "I possess your recorded voice." I recounted the conversation with the detective. Your laughter, your assertion that it was effective. I have the exact time from the camera. I have the incident report number. I possess all the proof. Her lips parted and she shook her head as though she could physically dispel the incriminating evidence. "That occurred a decade and a half ago," she whispered. "Individuals evolve." "Do they truly?" I questioned. "Because your visit here wasn't for an apology. You arrived to negotiate." Tears streamed down her face, yet her gaze persistently sought an advantage. "Please," she pleaded. "If you would simply publish something, an explanation, declare your forgiveness for me, state that I am no longer that type of person." I gazed at her and understood that retribution had already unfolded silently, without any active pursuit from me. She was experiencing the repercussions of a reality beyond her command, and she had yet to grasp the fundamental principle of human interaction. Forgiveness is not seized, it is granted. Only if the individual you harmed determines you've merited it. I drew a deep breath. "I will articulate just this once," I informed her. "I am no longer your protection." Her hands pushed against the portal, as if attempting to prevent its closure. "Hannah, I implore you. I am your mother and I was your daughter," I stated. This statement emerged with such clarity it seemed almost practiced. "However, you did not safeguard me. You exploited me. Therefore, this is the limit. You are not permitted to enter my residence. You are forbidden from contacting me further. Should you activate my doorbell even one additional time, I will summon law enforcement and pursue charges for harassment. Should you appear at my public engagements, security personnel will escort you away." A scoff escaped her. "If you attempt to exert influence on me through relatives, I will also disconnect from them." Her breathing became labored. "You cannot do that," she wailed. "I can," I asserted. "I have already done so." Her rage ultimately pierced through her weeping. "So, you are genuinely intending to destroy me?" She spat venomously. I inclined my head. "I am not destroying you," I replied, almost tenderly. "I am simply leaving you in the situation where you left me." Her lips quivered as she sought the exact phrases to wound me, to reassert dominance. Then she uttered what she believed would utterly dismantle me. "You are heartless," she hissed. I blinked once. "No," I responded, "I am liberated." I extended my arm and engaged the deadbolt, then disengaged the security chain and completely shut the entrance. Her cries were muted from beyond the barrier. The doorbell chimed once more, a desperate press, followed by another. I remained motionless. My cell vibrated, signaling yet another unanswered call. I lowered myself to the floor, my back against the door, and heard her steps eventually recede down the front stairs. For the very first time in my existence, the noise of her departure didn't fill me with dread. It brought me solace. She didn't vanish entirely after that. Not immediately. My mother attempted every method she had historically employed to manipulate me. She left voice messages from unidentified contacts. She sent emails from an unfamiliar address. She dispatched a handwritten correspondence to my workplace, containing the sort of theatrical phrases individuals compose when aiming to convey regret without genuine confession of their actions. I exerted maximum effort. I was experiencing pressure. You posed a challenge, I care for you. It was consistently affection wielded as a weapon, affection used as justification, affection acting as a restraint. I did not reply, not out of a desire for her anguish, but because any response would have provided her with the singular thing she continually sought: entry. The reality was, I had already granted her more than she merited. A distinct barrier. What came next was entirely her burden. 7 days after her appearance, my aunt telephoned me and stated softly, "Your mother has been informing others that you are psychologically unsound." I shut my eyes. Naturally, she would. When individuals who inflict harm lose their grip, they target trustworthiness. Let her proceed, I instructed. My aunt released a breath as if she had been suppressing it for 15 years. "I am so proud of you," she murmured. 48 hours later, my art gallery forwarded a message to me. An individual had commented beneath my exhibition pictures. "Does this pertain to Patricia Warren?" I fixed my gaze on the display for an extended period, my heart composed this time, not palpitating. My thoughts turned to the 15-year-old girl on the pavement, clutching a sales slip as if it were a crucial means of survival. I reflected on how my mother had relied on one factor above all else: quiet. Households like mine subsist on secrecy. They label it allegiance. They refer to it as deference. They describe it as keeping private matters private. Yet silence is the mechanism by which damage perpetuates. Thus, I undertook the most frightening, yet straightforward, action of my life. I composed a brief declaration and made it publicly accessible. I withheld her name. I did not issue threats against her. I refrained from profanity. My statement read, "This collection is drawn from my genuine experience of being deserted as an adolescent during an interstate journey. I possess verifiable records. I am sharing this narrative because no child or young person ought to be jeopardized for amusement, manipulation, or as a teaching tool. If you have experienced something comparable, know that you are not isolated, and it was not your responsibility." That was the entirety of it. Unvarnished truth, pure and unsentimental. The response was instantaneous. Communications inundated me from individuals I had never encountered: women, men, educators, former foster children, and adults still attempting to unravel the impact of their parents' actions. They weren't seeking sensational stories. They were expressing gratitude for me articulating an experience they had never managed to articulate themselves. At that point, the retribution transformed from individual gratification into something more profound. My mother's most significant consequence was not the loss of her employment or her standing. It was the forfeiture of her capacity to dictate truth. For once reality is clearly voiced, manipulation begins to wither. I learned from family members that she attempted to go to my subsequent event, but security personnel prevented her entry. Not because I desired a theatrical display, but because it adhered to the established parameter. I was told she wept to anyone who would lend an ear. I was told she declared me unfeeling. I was told she insisted she hadn't intended it. However, intention does not nullify consequence, and apologies are invalid when coupled with demands. Several months elapsed. The front door chime remained silent. The unanswered phone calls ceased. My existence did not attain flawlessness. Recovery does not operate in such a manner. On certain evenings, I still awaken from a dream, finding myself once again at that service area, searching the highway for approaching vehicle lights that never materialize. Yet now, upon waking, I don't seek comfort from a parent who disappointed me. I reach for the individuals I selected. I reach for the existence I constructed. And I recall the truly significant insight, the one my mother never grasped. Affection devoid of security is not affection. It is dominance. If you are a parent hearing this, understand my words distinctly. Building resilience in a child does not involve shaming them, imperiling them, or forsaking them to make a statement. Accountability is not to be taken lightly. And if you are an individual who was raised being labeled overly sensitive, overly gentle, or ineffective, I want you to comprehend this. Sensitivity is not a frailty. It is perception. And perception is what enables you to identify damage and select a path to escape. Here is the most challenging truth I came to understand. One can forgive someone internally while still denying them entry into your personal world. Limits are not malicious, they are safeguards. Therefore, tell me candidly, do you believe a parent who forsakes their offspring as a supposed teaching moment merits pardon? And if you were in my circumstances, would you have unlatched the door, or would you have acted as I did? Provide your thoughts below, indicating open or close, and explain your reasoning. I review each comment, as increased discourse about such narratives makes it progressively challenging for anyone to conceal mistreatment under the guise of family. I appreciate your attention. Here's a personal perspective on the antagonist. Susan represents a disturbing type of antagonist because she veils her harshness beneath seemingly positive motives. Initially, she doesn't appear threatening. She speaks like a disciplined parent, yet her compulsion for dominance transforms affection into an instrument of harm. By framing abandonment as an instructional experience, she evades responsibility and anticipates Hannah will safeguard her public image rather than prioritize Hannah's well-being. This is precisely what makes her destructive. She reinterprets actual events to circumvent repercussions. The affirmative message is unambiguous and strengthening. Authentic affection never necessitates apprehension, degradation, or injury. Well-functioning families educate through encouragement and direction, and when they fail to do so, establishing limits is not an act of unkindness.